Ryan Burge is back with us. Ryan's a regular guest on our show. He's assistant professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. His research appears on the site Religion in Public. He tweets at Ryan Burge on Twitter, and he writes regularly and picked up by the New York Times here the last couple of times we've talked to him. Ryan, congratulations on that New York Times pickup. It's very good.
Thank you so much. It's been a whirlwind of a day for sure.
It sure has. I mean, I opened up the New York Times today, and there I see you there.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. Little kid from a small town in rural Illinois made it to the New York Times.
Nice.
I love it.
Okay, the headline is a grabber. Why evangelical is becoming another word for Republican.
Yeah, that's something I've been working on for a while now. And it's one of those things when you chip away at the data long enough, you start seeing these weird things. And one of those weird things is that on these surveys, they ask everyone, do you identify as a born again or evangelical Christian or not? So it's a yes or no question. What's cool about that question is they ask everybody that. So even if you said you were an atheist or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist, you still get asked that question.
Why is that?
Because for a long time, we thought it was measurement error when a Hindu said, I'm an evangelical or a Muslim, right? Like they just messed up when they took the survey. Well, I dug into that a little bit and saw that it's actually not survey error. People are actually picking that evangelical designation for reasons that are completely not related to theology or Jesus Christ at all.
What? Okay, so you don't believe, you're a Hindu, you don't believe in Jesus, but you still may identify as an evangelical?
Yeah. And so, like, for instance, amongst Muslims who go to mosque more than once a week and identify as Republicans, 50% of them say they're evangelical or born again.
Wow.
That doesn't make any sense. That's crazy.
Well, the thing is, it's interesting because amongst Republican Muslims who only go to mosque once a year, it's only 20% of them identify as evangelical. So it's really this combination of religious devotion, but also Republican, political affiliation tied together. And so in the minds of people who are non-Christians, evangelical actually might have a more cultural or social significance or political significance than it does a theological significance anymore. So the word doesn't mean what pastors want you to think it means.
Right. And it doesn't mean what historically it's meant in the West.
That's right. And I've written this in several places, but Maya Angelou said, when people tell you who they are, believe them. And so if you tell me you're an evangelical, for a long time we thought they're messing up. They're checking the wrong box in the survey. I believe them now. I think they're actually picking that option for a very good reason. But because they're picking it for a reason that we don't understand and we think is wrong doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just they're understanding the word differently than the way that we are understanding it as survey givers. And I think that tells us a lot about what's going on in American society right now.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, so then evangelical, my faith in Jesus Christ, is not really what it means. Instead, you're saying evangelical is my faith in the Republican Party.
Or that I'm just generally conservative politically?
That's right. And the other piece of the article is that the share of self-identified evangelicals who say they never or seldom attend church rose from 16% in 2008 to 27% in 2020.
So 27% of evangelicals don't go to church?
Absolutely right. Yep. Because, again, they don't think you have to go to church to be an evangelical. They just don't see those two things as being together because for them, remember, it's a cultural and political identifier much more than it's a, religious or theological identifier. And so what we're seeing really is that word kind of jumped the fence and became something much bigger and I think much more watered down than what all of us assumed it to be.
Okay, so how did it happen?
I think it happened slowly over time, but I think its polarization drove a lot of it. I think what we know is that people want to find congruence in their lives. They want to all have everything they do and believe kind of line up behind each other, right? So in modern American politics, if let's say that you like guns and you're a big Second Amendment person, but where are you on the environment? Well, because I'm a Second Amendment person, that means I'm a Republican, so that means I have to be conservative on the environment too. I think what we're seeing is in all aspects of life, people are going, okay, what is my political affiliation, and how can I line up every other part of my identity behind my political affiliation? So 30 years ago, I could be, let's say, a nun but be a Republican. But the way that we understand the Republican Party today is it's so tied with evangelicalism that a lot of people are saying, wait, I have to align all parts of my identity. So I am a Republican, but I'm also an evangelical, despite the fact that I've never opened a Bible before, never been baptized, never been to church, because I want psychologically to have everything in my life lined up behind this one identity.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so then if people are saying that, then there are people who are truly evangelicals who now would say, well, I'm moving away from evangelicalism. I'm an ex-evangelical. I'm deconstructing.
But that doesn't mean the same thing, though.
Does it mean the same thing? Does it muddy the water?
Yeah. See, the problem is, though, who owns terms?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what we always talk.
That's what language is. Language is always evolving.
Yeah, it doesn't belong to me or you or Billy Graham or Franklin Graham or, Rick Warren or whoever. It doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to what the public thinks it means. Right. And I think I actually wrote a book chapter where I looked at how, social media uses the word evangelical, and they were associating it more with Trump over the last 4 years too. Mm-hmm. So there's clear evidence that the word evangelical, maybe because the media is using it in this way, maybe just because popular culture is moving it this way, but that word means something completely different now. And I think it puts, your sort of hardcore theological evangelicals, your devout evangelicals, in a really weird spot, because you've owned this term for hundreds of years now, but now the word's moved away from what you think it means. So do you adopt a new term, or are you mad about this? Like, I don't know. I haven't seen that response to this article yet.
So then you could be an evangelical, but not a Christian.
Absolutely. You can be an evangelical Catholic. Mike Pence himself calls himself a born-again Catholic. So it's been around for a while now. It's just who gets to say you're in and you're out. That's something I always have to talk about in my research. For instance, if I put Mormons outside the Christian group, LDS folks get mad at me. But if I put them inside the Christian group, then evangelicals get mad at me. Right. So, how do you square these circles? Because everyone wants to, I call it boundary maintenance, which is like, this is us and that's you, like us versus them. Mm-hmm. We want to create us versus them all the time. And reality is those lines are a lot blurrier and more porous than we want them to be.
Yeah. No kidding. And I think that's one of the things that's contributing to people's sense of alienation in American culture right now, is that the labels that used to give them a sense of security or place don't anymore.
Blurred.
Right? So if the Eagles Club gave you a sense, or you were a Boy Scout, or you were a part of the Catholic Church, or you were, part of the Alumni Association at your university, or whatever it is, all of those institutions have been called into question over the last decade plus. And so now people are kind of like free floating. And I think this type of language evolution, might be a part of that. Dr. Ryan Burge is with us, assistant professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. We're talking about his article, which is in today's New York Times, called "Why Evangelical is Becoming Another Word for Republican."
Right. But I'm still stuck on evangelical Muslims.
I'm stuck on it too. But again, it's the share of LDS that are evangelicals doubled over the last 10 years. About 20% of Catholics say they're born again now. I mean, it's infected every part of American life. And I have to say, like, evangelical branding is good, in that everyone knows what it means. And therefore, when you create a coherent brand, people gravitate to that brand. The problem is when they dilute that brand, then how do you respond to that whole thing? And, the reason I wrote the article is because Pew had this data that came out a couple of weeks ago that said evangelicalism actually grew during the Trump 4 years. Right. And a lot of my evangelical friends are like, look at us, look how good we're doing. But I wanted to say, wait a minute. Let's pull back the layers a little bit and see what's going on below that. Because it's probably you're happy with the top line, but you're not happy with what the composition looks like underneath, because they're not people who have accepted Jesus Christ, heard the good news, and came forward during an altar call. These are people that you think are heretical in some ways.
Right. And, it's all of a sudden we're crossing into different lands. And that's a lot what happened between 2016 and 2020 is, the Venn diagram got really screwed up, so people's, faith life and people's political life, all of a sudden it wasn't a whole lot of a Venn diagram. It was like just a pie chart, and it was the same thing. It was just all one color.
Yeah. And I think also it's ironic that the New York Times, which is of course a very liberal bastion, would, if you would say evangelical to a New York Times reader, they would not like most people who are evangelicals.
They would not. But I will say this. They are fascinated by evangelicals generally. Everything I write about evangelicals gets a lot more played than the stuff that's not. And people are like, but they're only 25% of American culture, but they do seem to take an outsized role in American life, political life, social life, theological life. And everyone is fascinated by evangelicals. But the New York Times, they want to understand this as well. They have a really good religion team over there. And, I was talking to one of the reporters just today, actually, about, how do they describe these people going forward? Do they still use the term evangelical, using it from the term 20 years ago? Does it still apply to the people today? Or do you have to add like a modifier,
Right.
It's like a cultural evangelical. Like that's what David French said on Twitter today.
Sure. Okay. So that's a question that you journalists ask amongst yourselves. The question I think that John and I are asking is, okay, so, or maybe we're not asking, but it's the question that we're seeing a lot of our guests ask is, do I want to be labeled an evangelical anymore?
I think it depends on how you define it, right? I think you have to say, I'm an evangelical like this, right? With like a description after it.
Right. So then let's just drop the term if we have to go into some kind of torturous description of what it is, which is kind of where we are.
People would say, I'm not an evangelical, I'm a Christ follower. I don't think you need any more description around that.
That's okay with me from a pastor side. From a social scientist side, I said, please don't do that. That's really annoying because I want to keep using. The thing is, we've been asking these questions in this way for 30 or 40 years now.
Right.
So if we change the question now, we've lost the ability to track concepts going back 3 and 4 decades, which is problematic, right? So I'm of two minds about this whole thing. I like still using the same questions we're doing, but I also think we should add new questions to add nuance to how we understand these concepts.
Nuance.
Yeah. Oh, well,
there's the key
we're
word.
Not good with nuance in America, Ryan. I don't know what you're looking for.
That's good.
Well, that's the thing is I think what's happened is to be a Republican is to be a religious person, and to be a Democrat is to be a non-religious person.
Right. So
and I think that's the
cultures
sorting.
Are clashing there, right?
Exactly right. It used to be that in the late 1980s, half of evangelicals were Republican, half were Democrat. Now, 70% of them are Republican. So we were seeing this sorting thing happen, and now people are they're saying they're running to one side or the other, saying we can't be in the middle because you get hit in the middle. If you're in the middle, you get hit by cars coming and going. So I'd rather be on one side or the other.
That's Dr. Ryan Burge talking about his article in today's New York Times, Why Evangelical is Becoming Another Word for Republican. Ryan, thanks so much.
Always good stuff.
Thank you, guys. Always appreciate it.
Excellent.